Hey, what's up, Northway? Glad you could take some time and tune in to what we're calling the Zoom In. So we've been doing this series called Fight the Drift, and there's a lot of content in our series that doesn't actually make it to our weekend services. And we wanted to take some time and actually dig deeper or zoom in on a couple of specific subject areas where drift tends to happen. And so right now I want to talk with some special friends of mine, some guests, Jay and Jen Simon. I want to talk about drift and fighting it in terms of our families. So every single one of us, we're all a part of a family. The makeups are different, the sizes, the shapes, the styles, they're all different across the board, but everyone is connected to or part of some family unit, and drift happens all the time in families. And today, in this moment, we want to get after it a little bit of that and learn from Jay and Jen's experience and their wisdom, some of their struggles, some of their successes, and help us all as families fight the drift. So before we jump into the content, I want to take a moment and let them sort of introduce themselves and tell us who they are so we can get a bit of the context of their family unit. So Jay, we prescripted this at the beginning, so you're supposed to talk first. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your family makeup? Again, thanks for being here, guys. I love you guys. You guys mean the world to me, and I'm excited for this time together. Jay, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Well, thanks for having us, Dave. And yeah, I'm Jay. Of course, my wife Jennifer on the line. We're out of our home. I'm outside on the patio, and she's inside in the living room, which is kind of strange doing a Zoom meeting, but here we are. But we've been at Northway since 2006. But our family makeup is we have 3 kids. We've gone through the cycle of parenting. There's 4 or 5 different cycles to raise kids. But right now, as of a week ago, we're empty nesting for the 2nd time. Last September we did, then COVID. Now we're doing it again. So
everybody came back from COVID. It like reset your family, and then now they're back. And
we had a lot of fun. It was great. But our oldest is Justine. She's 24. She went to Grove City, and now she's with Passion Conference in Atlanta. It's her 3rd year, and she just left for that. Then our second is our son Jonah. He got married to Taylor last August, a year ago. Yeah. And they're in New York City finishing up his graduate degree. Then our youngest is Janie. She's 19, and she goes to Duquesne University. Yeah, she's a sophomore. Jen and I have been married for 29 years.
Wow, 29 years. I mean, that's exciting. So the big one coming up, 30. I guess the next one is always the big anniversary, right? And so
we're going to do something, which is kind of drifting. That's something I'm excited to do.
There you go. Good segue, Jay. And so, like you mentioned these different cycles of parenting our kids, and so. What are the drifts you guys have experienced and seen when it comes to the family and to the Simons? Because I'm guessing drift looks different for all of us, but there's probably some threads of consistency that we can be mindful of and on the lookout for. So what are some of the drifts you've seen or experienced, or maybe an example that you guys have in mind?
As we were talking through this, there's different seasons of drift. Yep. And different circumstances that could push drift. And I mean, certainly when your kids are real little, it's very easy to drift from everything else except maintaining their needs. You can drift from one another, you can drift from friends, you can drift from church because the demand is so high. So take some real intentionality in that season.
Let me pause that. So that if you're a younger family, there's a temptation to put all of 110% of our focus on the kids from our marriage relationship.
Correct.
Like that's dynamic. That's a great point. That's something to be mindful of. When we first got married, I didn't know how much attention my son was going to steal from me. So I was jealous of him, and that created a challenge in our relationship. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't know it was going to happen. That's exactly what you're talking about. Great. Sorry. Exactly. I got excited.
No. And we experienced that too. And then you have to sort of step back and say, well, what's going on here? And it's really in a family dynamic, you have to sort of white knuckle this idea of God first, your spouse, and then your kids. Because everything around us will say, you need to put those kids first or they're going to be homeless or something. You know what I mean? Like you just take it to the nth degree. But God's promises are his promises, and that's his order. And when we obey that order, you can see flourishing in your household. So I would say that's a real easy one to identify early on when you're building a family.
So if you're taking notes and you're watching this, if I was like retweeting Jen, I would say that God's order leads to flourishing in our life. I mean, that is one for the ages. That is one that we learned that early on, but man, do we drift and forget that. That is powerful. And I just didn't want to, sorry, I love to interrupt. I don't know why.
That's good. No, keep it real.
Your show, Dave.
I'm taking notes as we're doing this because I'm like, that's so brilliant. That is so, that's a timeless truth for someone listening. God's order leads to flourishing in our families.
When I hear you both speak about the drifting of the family, I think about, we have the 3 kids, they're fairly the same age group, but the importance of individual attention to each one was huge, absolutely huge. So it's almost like we had 3 separate kids as we were raising them, versus just putting them in a pot and boiling. That's a big happy family, because our 3 kids, that's everyone's family. They're all so different and they need different attention. Yep. So I remember that as they were aging.
Yeah, there is no one size fits all strategy, because you're right. I'm seeing it with my kids. They all respond differently to simply the way I talk. And I've got to have a different approach for each of them. And you're talking about individual time with them.
Yes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's why. So for families with multiple kids, so how did you guys do that one? So just to dive in on that, did you guys do anything specific or have anything creative that you did? I'm sure you weren't perfect. So by the way, too, there's always pressure when you talk about parenting, to feel like, oh man, we can't talk about parenting unless we were perfect. You guys would say you haven't been perfect. You haven't always gotten it right, but it's trying to do the right things over the course of time. You guys say that that's true. And so this individual time with your kids.
Oh, for sure. It's for sure. I would say 2 things on that. You're going to make big mistakes as a parent, and your kids are going to make big mistakes as they grow up. Mm-hmm. And there's just got to be room for that. And that's why we serve a God of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Somebody that I like to read says that's like gospeling our family, is that cycle of repentance and forgiveness. And that just that's required on an ongoing basis. So we can't be too hard on ourselves in terms of our expectations, because that's going to happen. And you don't want to stuff that away or hide it, because that creates drift. Mm-hmm. That definitely creates drift from relationships within the family, or even your ability to be successful outside of it. So that's really important. And then I would say, a great example, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was going to say, so there, what you said, gospeling our family, and you talked about individual time. And I mean, some of us are probably thinking about, we're supposed to have date time too. And we drift away from that. And so if we're going to gospel our family, and we're going to go through that cycle of repentance and forgiveness, what I hear you saying, Jen, is let's not beat ourselves up when we miss the mark. Let's admit it, confess it, and then go have a date night. Mm-hmm. And ignore it and let it fester. That leads to further drift. Or if we missed a one-on-one time with our daughter or our son, don't expect to be perfect. Gospel our family. Is that Matt Chandler? Is that a Matt Chandler?
It is.
Gosh, I didn't even know that. That sounds like him. So, okay.
Yeah. But it's been really helpful. That rhythm, and knowing that we need to get into a practice of that, because we're going to need to do it again and again and again. And when we don't address the things that need that causes drift within the family. Yeah.
Yeah. You had a second thing, and I totally.
Well, Jay might want to talk about this, and I thought this was really creative on his part. He needed to get a way to be intentional with his time with our oldest daughter, Justine, and she started riding horses when she was, oh goodness, I think 2nd grade. She might correct me on that when she watches this, but it was young. And he's like, I'll do that. That's something I can do. And it's hard for me as a dad to find one-on-one time with my daughter on things that we're like-minded. So that was just always their thing. He's like, he wrote it into his schedule. He's like, I'm taking her to the barn. I watch her, I pick her up. And that just worked. And that was years on years on years. So they would always have that afforded them conversations about the people at the barn or what she did at her practice. That's just one example.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. You got to be where your kids are, not where you are. And you know, with boys, it's usually sports. Well, I shouldn't say that. With Jonah, it was baseball.
Yeah.
I didn't miss a practice, didn't miss a game. But then Janie wasn't into sports that much. She got into musicals. And I remember it was her high school musical. It's like, you know what? I would go to every game. So I went to every performance of her high school musical.
Oh,
but
wow.
it's only just to see her, you know, but I know that makes an impact when she sees, but that's what you do. Your time needs to be where they are. You know, love equals time. That's all. When you're raising your kids, period, you know, just spend time. And as you have the hiccups, you know, the forgiveness and the apologies will come on both sides, you know, but it's hard. The world's hard. There's a lot going on.
Mm. So that you're talking about, that's brilliant, Jay. Love equals time. I always think about, like, when I played sports, high school, college, you're out there in the game, but you cannot help but look for your parents.
Yeah.
There is just something magnetic about that. And so to parents, if you're able to be there and be present, keep going. It makes a world of difference in terms of, that's like an investment in the relationship with the kid. And if you're not, don't feel guilty about that. There's other places you can spend time with your kids, right? Did you guys leverage drive time in any creative ways? That's a phrase. Can you talk about that one?
I was going to say, conversely, as like Jay did the barn with the horses, one of my favorite memories is carpooling Jonah and his buddies back and forth to basketball. I was privy to all kinds of conversation, what was happening at school. That was just a more comfortable place for boys in that age group to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult when they become teenagers to find the space that makes them comfortable to want to communicate. Mm-hmm. So that's where you kind of have to get creative. Mm-hmm. And I looked on those days so fondly. I mean, being the taxi driver is, you know, we all joke about it. And those days where everyone, last one gets their license, but there's a sweetness to it too, mm-hmm. because you do have a captive audience in the car.
Yep. Yep. And you let them pick the music, right? You let them sort of help create the space. Keep dialogue open.
Even the volume.
Yeah. So what about, like, I think families desire, like, we have this, those are all great points. And sometimes we wake up and realize, like, man, we wanted to have family dinners, or we wanted to have Sunday evening family time, or we set a course on the school year. We're going to have devotions every night. Like, what happens when that doesn't happen? Like, can you guys talk about that? Because that's real life. Like, I think we all have great intentions, and then I got to stay late at work, or I can't go. I got to travel, and I can't go to the horse lessons or to soccer practice or to the gymnast, whatever it is. What happens when those rhythms break? And what happens, I mean, with you guys in marriage? How do you guys, because just as our kids are different, husbands and wives are different. We all have a different knee-jerk initial response to pain or to challenge or to missing the mark. So there's a question in there somewhere. I don't know what it is, but, like, how do you respond whenever you realize, like, oh my gosh, we've drifted, or this isn't what we wanted to do?
Yeah, it's, you know, and I would put it as our kids have had seasons of their life that they drifted in a painful manner. Mm. And that's what, when we look back, it was those times that the drift occurred. Even though we might have been doing that stuff, it still happened. So we had some really personal things throughout the course of life. And that's where, you know, the power of prayer and being a Christian family really comes in. I remember one of our friends, Aaron and Jamie Smith, they were talking about, you better be prepared for the storm with your faith before the storm. And that's so important. And there's all these little mini storms in life. We all have them. And that's where I think it's the drift of each of our kids when they went through those storms. and how we were just able to rally, and you get through them through God's grace, but that's kind of where I'm thinking. Then what do you got?
What about,
Well,
like, are
and I
you,
would say that's so true is, and that goes back to what I said earlier about making mistakes, and seasons are going to happen that are disruptive. And those are times where we really, and this is an ongoing thing, but you need to understand that if we're doing that order that I talked about earlier, that there's nothing more important you can do for your child than pray over them on a regular basis. And that sounds, like a religious platitude or a bumper sticker, but it's not. It's the promise of God, and it's his activity in your house, and it changes the atmosphere. Literally changes the atmosphere. I mean, there have been times when Jay and I would sit alone in our children's bedrooms and just pray specifically for them when everyone was at school or the kids were gone. There are times when I would sit outside their bedroom doors at night while everyone was sleeping and just pray and read scriptures into the atmosphere to release God's power. And he's never, ever disappointed us on that. I mean, it might not have been the outcome we were expecting,
right,
but we see his hand in all of it.
Right.
And then it takes the pressure off of us needing to be perfect, to know everything, to control the situation, all of those things that inwardly make us push out because we feel imbalanced. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I love how you said sometimes prayer feels like, well, it's the churchy thing to say. If you grew up going to church, it's the Sunday school sort of answer, but yet it is powerful. It is communing and communicating with our Father. It is what the Spirit does for us, intercedes on our behalf. And we, rather than look at it as a churchy answer, it's a privilege, and it's an incredible opportunity for us to go before the Father on behalf of our kids and our family. And it's a constant thing we can do and must do to fight the drift. So I'm glad you bring that up, because it doesn't matter the shape or size or situation of your family. We all can pray. Mm-hmm. All can pause. And really, it's a moment of surrender, giving our kids to the Lord and trusting him more so than us.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I think of, Dave, along these lines is as we started losing our kids from the house, meaning Justine went to college and Jonah and Jane, I look back, Justine's been out, 6 years now, but when she left, it left a void in our home. You could feel it.
Yeah.
And then I realized, now, that void was probably felt 10 times more by Jen than by me. So husbands, you need to, including myself, I'm speaking myself, you need to fill that void. So I had to fill 1/3 of our house void, then 2/3, now it's 3/3, and that's what we're trying to do right now. There's definitely a felt, when you raise your kids and their room's empty, it touches you, but then you think, isn't that our job, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's a warning, because there's something there, and it's very, very strong for Jen. It was much stronger for her, understandably, because she was in the house more than me as we were raising the kids.
Yeah, I think Tim Keller talks about, his marriage book is fantastic. I'm forgetting the name of it, but he talks about this. Sometimes we build an expectation that our spouse isn't going to change. And that if you get married at 23 or at 28, whatever it is, that's going to be like that forever. And yet we go through different seasons of life, and there's loss, and there's success, and there's kids transitioning out. And he makes a statement like, it's this idea that in marriage, we have to sort of go through these seasons and relearn how to love our spouse in that season, because they're different in some ways. We all change and grow. And I imagine, Jay, that's like, when your kids started to leave, you had to there's things you just couldn't bank on and depend on. And so you had to be maybe more present or more attentive, and the conversation shifts. And I'm glad you acknowledge that, because that is a warning for seasons of change. I mean, we have to get even more intentional and lean in closer and trust that God's going to lead us through that season like he did the last one. So
Because as we raise families, your marriage does drift because of the time element. You don't have the time to
Right.
give your spouse as much as your kids. We're both focused on all the kids, so there's only so much time. But
Yeah.
once you have more time, then you can spend more time with your spouse.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's been a very interesting, and I love that you pointed that out, Dave, that we're constantly changing, and it's like we do this dance, but as soon as one person steps differently, the whole dance has to change.
Mm,
And that happens every time a family member has you know, a major shift of some sort, or maybe it's a crisis or an illness or just a big change, something you have to work through as a family. And that you just have to know that that's okay, and that you can recalibrate
yeah,
and get to a new playing field. But that change thing, don't be afraid of it. Just expect it to come,
that's
and know that you can work through it, and that you're just going to have a redefinition of who you guys are. And like Jay always says, we're all on the same team. And we talk about that inside of our house. He always says, I'm not going anywhere. We're all on the same team, and we'll work this out. And that doesn't mean we don't fight. I mean, we argue and battle and
really.
we go to bed mad. I mean, we do. That's not what you're supposed to do, but we do. But at the end of the day, we kind of go to our corners, and then we come back together.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that it's an unhealthy environment. Certainly there are elements, and you can get to a level that becomes unhealthy.
Right.
And here's another thing I wanted to say. If you're stuck as a family or stuck as a couple, get help. I mean, if the drift is there and you just can't pull that anchor back in, let somebody help you get unstuck.
Yeah, that's great.
Like, there's no issue with that. And if people were really honest, you'd be shocked at how many people around us, and like everyone in our family has used someone to help us along a season at some point or another.
That's really good.
And it's just important.
Yeah. Something Brooke and I have done, and you guys are a part of this, is we try to ask for time with couples and families who are ahead of a season of us, who know, like they've walked this hallway that we're about to walk, and we go to dinner or have them over or get together and just listen and learn, ask questions. And something you guys said, I think this was in the pre-call actually, and I could talk about families and drift like for a very, very long time. This will sort of be my last subject matter to dive into for this session is, you talked about an area of potential drift or temptation, if you will, is like we parent differently at times. I think, Jen, you were talking about this idea of Jay might have a response in his style and his personality, and I might have a different response. And sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to be perfect and to be exactly the same. Can you talk about that? Do you remember? Did I jog your memory with that?
I do. I was just having a conversation with a dear friend of mine who has 4 kids of her own that are just moved into adulthood. And we were thinking back about some of the things that we wish we would have known. And there was this big, big push early on, sort of in church culture, that in order to be great parents, you had to be 100% unified. And that's just not, I don't think that's possible. And I think that we suffered a little bit because of it. At least I did, because I put expectations on Jay's response to our children that were unfair. Wow. And what I needed to understand is that there's a place for his response and a place for my response. And that it didn't make him wrong. And that I needed to give more credence to his style. And I think that would have taken a little bit of the pressure off and some of the stress that's already in a tough season when you're raising your children and your biggest prayer is that they know, love, and serve the Lord. So I think that's, and when you look in and you get this idea that, oh, they are doing devotions every night at 6 o'clock, or that wasn't realistic for us. It wasn't happening. So as we get older, I'm finding myself we're giving more space to those different responses. And it's true with everything. It's true with the way you respond to parenting. It's true. You said earlier, how you respond to grief or loss or a pandemic. There's individual ways of response, and we need to leave room for that within our families so people feel like they belong.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I hear when I think about like pain, most of our problems came from our tongue, what we were saying, you know. So I just encourage, you know, it takes maturity. We all have it, but you know, as you're young and get frustrated, you start, you know, that's where the pain comes from. You say things to your kids you can never take back, to your wife, your husband, like just everyone, just pray about your tongue every day that you don't say something that just isn't godly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much pain can be avoided if we tame the tongue and
Oh my
we
gosh.
choose to listen more than we speak. That's incredibly wise.
And that comes with text messages and emails and social media too. You know,
Yeah, I heard John Riley, the Dormont campus pastor, he said we need to tame our tongue and our keyboards. So,
yeah.
Amen.
like that's really, really a 20
Well, that,
education.
yeah, so that's probably where Jen and I, like, I'm a much more quiet, I don't use as many words, which is a problem with the parenting styles, right? I was the more, I don't like conflict, you know, I walk away, I shut up, and, you know, so that was my downfall. But
I would chase him. You need to fight with me. We're having a fight, whether you want it or not.
I was afraid to talk, you know, and it just, you know, we've been there.
Yeah, Mike, I'll sort of like summarize that. I heard a quote, Michael Hyatt, author, publisher, editor guy. He said that God has given us difference in our spouse so that we are complemented for every situation. So sometimes the wife needs to be strong and lead, and sometimes the husband needs to be strong and lead, and you've been equipped for every situation, whether it's parenting or finances or career, and learning to, like what Ephesians talks about, that mutual submission, letting
Yes.
one lead, and it's that dance, right? It's always the only leader and the follower. It's this balance, and that you learn that rhythm and that process over time. So, hey, I want to say thank you guys. I love you guys deeply and cherish time with you guys and your wisdom and your experiences. To Justine and to Jonah and to Janie, you guys have amazing parents. You know that, and I just want to say this: they're not amazing because they're perfect. They're amazing because they're in the game and in the process and willing to be in that gospel process of redemption and restoration and repentance and forgiveness. So if you guys are listening, and I know you are, you should text your mom or dad and thank them because they're pretty incredible people. So thank you guys. Super great wisdom, super insightful, life-giving, encouraging topics. This was fun for me. So I hope this was fun for you. We're gonna have a couple more sessions zooming in. We're gonna talk about the church. We're also gonna talk about drift when it comes to like living our lives Monday through Saturday and drifting from mission. So tune in for those. Thanks, Northway. I love you. I hope you're encouraged. Have a great rest of your day.